Wow. Welcome to another amazing show, the Bathrobe Editions. John Graham, who you're about to hear, really, really walks the walk. I mean, he runs the run. I mean, the level at which he's creating solutions in our culture is inspiring. How he does it, the approach he uses, there are so many wise lessons in this, and the amount of humility.
Hmm.
All of it combines to be really inspiring and remind me of what it means to embody a miracle. I mean, I can say nothing less than that.
And on that note, get ready to ride with the Moped Outlaws and John David Graham. Drink adrenochrome cola, support Compton Cowboys, and blast. Subscribe, leave reviews, hit us up. Enjoy the ride.
Sis, hallo?
Leven.
Bestuur zeker wegen them.
Joj, iets niet, joh.
Sitaki ubenza, anika sirikie.
Two outlaws on the lam, taking the back roads through America.
You can't drink enough coffee for this show.
And now it's time for Monday Madness with the Moped Outlaws, Greg and Mark.
Your side of the bed has been cold these 30 years. This house our love built together, empty now without you. But I've never really been alone. Ghosts from my haunted past parade by me every night. People now dead, places forgotten by others. They say you get over those hurts, but you don't. A wounded body can heal, but a broken soul stays broke, and all that remains are memories of a lifetime of pain and regret. But Kate, you saved me in every way a person can be saved. Your love healed my shattered life. You were my sign from God. My heart no longer aches, not like it has all these years. You were my second chance, my reason to believe. And soon that faith will lead me back to you, running as fast as I can.
Yay!
Welcome, John.
Hey, gentlemen, I'm glad to be here.
Wow. That's a very powerful opening for a book.
I hired a publicist to help me with that because I'm a writer by mentality, and she is extremely good. But what I wanted her to do was convey the emotions of the book. And the voice actor we hired was just superb because I felt the passion of the novel in his voice, the angst of a man's long journey. So I still watch it and get the same emotional reaction.
So as the author of this novel, do you have that real life passion in you? Are you a man who has lived out a dark night of the soul and passionately risen from the ashes of your creation?
That's a very literary way of saying that I've gone down a lot of detours. Yes, a lot. Very briefly, I was homeless at one point. I went through a series of jobs, from children's home counselor to a truck driver to a building contractor to a journalist, fireman, even a fireman. And at one point, I was a minister, thinking that I could be a teacher, but I found out that the church required some degree of civilization, and I didn't do well with that. So I stumbled across this idea of opening a homeless shelter in our home, thinking that I could help people who were struggling more than I was. And my wife and I made that commitment, and we literally opened up our home. And then one thing led to another, and the Department of Corrections said, "We have men coming from prison who need a place to stay temporarily. Can you give them shelter?" And we did that, and I found my niche at 53. So yes, my life has been riven, as you say, with many ups and downs and lefts and rights, until now we've been able to help almost 2,500 men and women restart their lives.
Wow. Wow.
In your
Incredible.
in your bio,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry. In your bio, it talks about how you were able to successfully open 17 of these homes. How did you find the financing, and how did you make that work financially for you and the
That's a very good question. We started off with the oldest house in town, 140 years old. It hadn't been touched in years, needed a boatload of work, but my construction background enabled me to do the labor. And so we remodeled this house, and then my wife was working at McDonald's. So we formed a nonprofit corporation at the same time, and literally made no income for 5 years. And we were trying to get grants and such, really just barely scraping by. Some days we couldn't pay the bills, but at one point she got a small inheritance, and we were able to buy the house next door, and that really opened doors. So we had an official shelter. And the Department of Correction then said, because you have a shelter, could you now take some of our residents and we'll pay a per diem? So that's how we started, with 4 beds contracted. And that was the beginning of a minimal income. And then 4 beds, because the need is so great, it became 8 beds and 10 beds. And truth is, now we have 19 houses, and we're looking at another one. We've gone into 3 counties, but it's because we have, I now have 10 staff. And the idea is that we're not doing this for profit. We're doing this because it's an expression of our faith, but we don't require faith of our residents. We just ask one simple question: are you hungry? And that, to me, is the best thing I could ever ask somebody, because that's a language they understand. And it's been a long 22 years. And to be quite candid, there were a lot of pushback from the community in the beginning, because the idea of having not just a shelter, but a shelter for people coming from prison in your neighborhood. You can see the politics now about immigration. Well, take that, make it very personal. Just as an anecdote, Springfield, Ohio is near our house. And Springfield has been ground zero in this fear mongering of eating cats and dogs. Well, we had the same thing where people were writing to the editor saying, he's going to bring in rapists, he's going to bring in murderers. I had a 10-year-old girl write to the editor and say, am I safe in school?
Got it.
It was pretty difficult for a long time.
So what made it work? How were you able to help these men move through the spiritual and personal changes that they needed to in order to reintegrate and realign themselves with productive lives?
We don't offer programming as such. It's more of a mentoring. It's a very passive approach, because we partner with local people like Job and Family or the reentry office and let them do the job training. But what we offer is a safe place where you can at least know that you have a shelter, so you can go out and get a job. And then the idea is, if I just sit down and say, how are you doing, Bob? Terry, tell me how your day went. And just listening shows more respect than anything I could ever say. And it's a mentoring type program. And then in the neighborhood, what we did was we made sure that our houses were the best house in the neighborhood. Quiet, it was clean. We require our residents do their own housekeeping. So that way, at the end of the day, if you come back to a made bed, you know that at least you did something right today. It's an old Navy SEAL trick that I learned. And it works. It really works, because you can't control job rejections, but you can control making your bed.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very practical way to speak the language of our residents. And well, let's put it this way. At the end of my day, when I've spent time helping somebody or just talking to somebody, we had 7 fellows graduate from a reentry class. And I was able to see the pictures of them standing in their new suits, holding up a diploma. They were extremely proud of that, what you and I would consider to be a minor accomplishment. But it was the first time many of them wore a suit and it was the first time they had any diploma. So I felt like that gave my life purpose to see what they were doing in that little way, which was a very big way for them.
Do you have the support of the community overall now?
Yes, it was very tricky for a while. There were petitions, there were council meetings, there were ordinances enacted, there were threats. I had police protection at one point. But what we did was we never responded like you're seeing in politics today, where you name call back and forth. To me, that's the worst thing you can do. So what we did was I always referred to people as Mr. or Ms. So that, at the very least, I showed respect for them in my mind rather than denigrating them. And then come winter, when the snows came, I took my snowblower and I cleaned everybody's sidewalk. And I made sure that we did it without saying a word. It's a way of passively of saying, I'm not going to get into this argument. I'm going to take control of my response. And eventually, the critics who used to wave at us with one finger now use all their fingers.
Oh, very kind. That's great.
And that's true. That's a true story. And now the county probation office now refers their people to us, and we're able to save their jail costs because we house them in lieu of jail. And then they can get a job and pay taxes and pay child support. We calculate we've saved the county $1 million in jail costs over the past years. And believe me, $1 million speaks very loudly to Republicans or Democrats.
Yeah, that's probably part of the problem. I think we lost Marc temporarily.
Well, I'm here, but apparently my camera doesn't work.
Okay.
But
I'm
you
working
look
on
good.
fixing
That's
that
what
right now.
Do you want to see if you can fix it? Like come in and come out, or were you?
Oh, I'm working on it in the background right now.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's not derail the conversation. So,
At
John,
least you
you've
weren't
written
picking your
two
nose
books.
when the screen froze.
Yeah, I don't pick my nose. You've written 2 books, and Citizen Circle, a mentoring model for rehabilitating ex-offenders in the Dark County, Ohio. That seems to be an evolution of this process, right?
Yes, that was my doctoral thesis. And the idea was that I wanted to document the positive impact of mentoring people coming from prison. And I really had no idea it was a 10-year study, and I had no idea how that would end up. But my data showed that if you help somebody coming back from prison, you and the community not only benefit sociologically, but psychologically and spiritually. So it's a win-win proposition. And then when I published it, I think maybe 3 people read it, and they said it was good.
So do you consider it kind of a blueprint for how communities can, make headway against this houseless problem and this problem of wayward souls, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Do you think this book represents a blueprint that others could use to help address some of the issues that come up around houselessness and recidivism?
But in some respects, it's an academic approach, and so you can look at it. There's a sociological section, there's a theological section, because it was done from a theological standpoint, but because it was part of the faith-based initiative. But it doesn't require faith. It simply says faith can motivate people to be involved. Not to participate necessarily, but to be involved as a mentor. And yes, it can be a model. But what I found, for example, when I was going to the city council meetings to explain, and I would bring data in, I had reams of data, literally 3 and 4 and 5 inches thick. And I would present the statistics, and nobody listened, because nobody listens to facts. We're seeing that now in the political arena, that we don't want to hear about your position, even though we say we do. We want to hear name calling. We want to hear one-liners. We want to get a zinger in there. We want to hear you talk about Arnold Palmer or something ridiculous. And so what I determined to do was, how do I share the story of reentry or the story of a changed life? Better yet, how do I offer the concept of second chances so that everybody could identify with it, not just a man or woman coming from prison? And that's where the novel came from. It was the idea of second chances in a story form. And the reviews coming back have been exactly what I hoped they would be. They're a very readable book. It's a page turner. I felt the story. I couldn't put it down. I had a 91-year-old man tell me he was up till 3 a.m. reading the book.
Wow.
And it's garnered 25 awards. And I thought, this is far beyond what I anticipated. And it's selling very well. And even though the money is irrelevant, because I put more money into writing it than we ever get back in royalties. But what I'm trying to do is generate conversations like this about the issues: homelessness, drug addiction, family abuse. How do you deal with racial issues? Those are all things that are discussed in that, what I call a Forrest Gump type of coming of age story.
Wow.
So I'm very optimistic that it's going to say the things I wanted to say all along in a way that people will actually want to read it.
Have you thought about dramatizing it for the screen?
I get advertisements, of course, and you have to be so careful because there's a lot of phishing out there. What I don't want to do is sell the rights blindly, because it's very translatable. When I say Forrest Gump, it does have that same type of model, because it follows Daniel Robinson through the 60s when he's in San Francisco with the flower children, the hippie bus, the whole thing. He's dealing with the heroin invasion in San Francisco. He's dealing with racial violence in Detroit. He was at Kent State during the riots, the protests.
The murder of the 4 students.
That's exactly right. And that was I was literally at Kent State the day of the shootings, but not in the protest. I was in a protest at Ohio State that day. So I had a very good feeling of what that was like. And to be quite candid, I'm finding the anger and the violence that we're seeing currently to be very similar to that age.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, with the people you're interacting with from prison, and my layperson's knowledge is that there's a lot of anger in an individual's life that gets them into prison and it continues into prison. Are they, like, what is their take on the United States of America right now?
I have to be very careful because I can't speak statistically, but I would say, based on the people we've dealt with over the years, that's their focus is much more myopic, much more focused on what am I going to do today. And I think there's a basic mistrust of all government structures. And so we have to be careful, because we walk that careful line between an authority and a partner. So I have to have structure, I have to have boundaries and accountability, but I'm not here to be the parole officer. So I focus in on, how can I help you get a job? And so I have to be very limited in my approach. And if you can stay 90 days and move to your own apartment, then I'm glad for that. Or if you move in with your girlfriend because you didn't like our rules, but you did what I asked while you're with me, that's a success. So I like to say that most of our guys are riding short horses, so I have to aim very low.
Are you able to be completely transparent and say to an individual, I hear you, I would love to, and because of the policies of the structure that I'm a part of, that's not an option?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because what I don't want to do is be your best friend, but I also don't want to be the parole officer. I don't want to run Shawshank. It's not a lockdown facility. It's a boarding house arrangement. And so what we're trying to do on a very basic level is do a pronoun switch. What led you to prison was I want this today. I need this, and I'm going to get that. And And when we do housekeeping, we're saying, if you make your bed, your roommate will benefit because he's sharing that room. And if you don't, you're showing disrespect to him as well as yourself. So I'm trying to teach people to say we. That to me is the key to rehabilitation, switching pronouns. So I remember one day I stopped by one of the houses and I just sat on the porch and I talked about nothing with the guys. And one of the guys thanked me when I left because he said, I'm really glad that the director, he said the man, could just sit here and bullshit with us. And it wasn't putting it on. I wasn't trying to be one of the guys. I was just talking. And I'm very comfortable doing that. And I find that people respond to that just be honest, but don't try to be one of the guys and try to be hip. Just be yourself. Guys have a very good sense of when somebody's lying. They may not have finished high school or even grade school, but they know the street. And so just be honest. And people respond to that, I believe.
Yeah, this mirrors some experience I had in the incarceration industry. There's this element of authenticity that once you are able to be present to your own humanity in an authentic way and then see them as just on the same level as you authentically, then respect can be, planted in that fertile soil of the possibilities.
Absolutely. And part of it, I think, is that I remember that I was in the same position, even though I never went to prison. I remember spending 30 years going from job to job, state to state, moving my family, and we still have repercussions of all those changes I enforced on my kids. So I can identify to a degree, particularly when they talk about my mother was never there, or she was addicted, or I have never met my father, or I was in foster care. My home wasn't that extreme, but I can identify with that isolation they felt growing up. And that's a common thread with most everyone we deal with.
Addiction seems to flow out of a lack of community.
Yes, absolutely. Drugs changed everything. And it used to be, we say, in 1958, the idea was that when David Wilkerson, who worked with the heroin addicts in New York, when he would go to the suburbs, they would say, well, that's among those people in the city. Mm-hmm. But those people with, first it became with marijuana, then became with harder drugs, and now it's heroin and fentanyl. It's in even the rural communities where I live now, which is a little white community northwest of Dayton, Ohio. And we have the same heroin issues here that he had in New York in 1958. It's us.
Yeah, it also seems like prescription drugs, even in these suburban areas, were very prominent. And, there's the famous Rolling Stones song, Mother's Little Helper. So it seemed like society accepted a drug addiction if it had a prescription attached to it.
Well, look at the fact that you can get a drug now that will lose weight for you.
Right.
What is it, Ozempic? Yeah.
There's different brands of it. Yeah.
And so the idea is that I don't have to be as disciplined as I used to be. I can simply take this shot. And if it works, then I'm all for it. Or better yet, we can get some cool sculpting done and take care of that little bulge. But you're absolutely right. Absolutely. Many of the people, the professional people we dealt with, started off with scripts for oxys, legitimate painkillers. And then when they couldn't get them, then they found something for a nickel bag or a dime bag. And before you know it, you're in a different world.
Right. Or there's even a friend of mine who was addicted to painkillers, and he had 2 doctors that he'd bounce back and forth with. And it wasn't until his wife said to him, look what you're doing, that the blinders came off and he realized he was addicted.
Well, think about it. One of my staff came from rural Ohio down along the river. And I've asked him why, if his mother lives there and his brother and such, why doesn't he want to live back there? And he said, there's nothing but meth. back in my home county. That's the only way you can make a living. And that's a frightening thing because it's a beautiful place.
That's also very heartbreaking.
Yes. And even in Kentucky, where I went to college, the idea was that you could moonshine. You work in the mines, or you do shine, or you move on down the line. That's what it used to say. And you could move to Cincinnati and work in the factories. But now none of the above are available. You can't do shine. You can't work in the mines, and the auto companies are no longer in Cincinnati. So what do? You grow weed, or you do meth.
I want to ask you about the way you see what I call the carceral system and its use of forced labor as a modern form of slavery. Here in California, there's an initiative on the ballot that is going to end that for California inmates, that they won't be able to pay them pennies a day. They'll have to pay the minimum wage. What's your viewpoint on that? What incidents have you heard of? What kinds of insights do you have based on the experience of your population that you've worked with?
It's not been much of a discussion here. I know in the South, the way that the civil rights laws were written as a loophole to slavery, that the people were put in jail, and much of the South was rebuilt through slave labor that was now incarcerated labor. And I think it's more subtle in the North. But on the upside, the positive side, if I'm doing nothing in a cell that's 6 by 12, if I have an opportunity to do something that at least I feel like I may not make money at it, but I'm doing something to keep my mind and my body active. So we encourage people to do community service with us. Like, can you help me move this refrigerator? We don't say, I want you to cut the grass, but we often say, will you help me with this? And if they don't do it, they don't do it. But we see community service as a way of giving back to the community, but it's completely voluntary. And I use it as time to talk.
Institutionally, if inmates were working, and instead of making 25 cents per piece or whatever it is, if they were making minimum wage and they exited the carceral system with some savings, would that help them reestablish themselves, you think?
I know some of the fellas have used working for the penal system in the job force there. They've used it. There's a euphemism they use for it. Instead of saying it was prison labor, it's an LLC type of naming, and then so they can use that on their resume, because there is job skill training with that. And I have to be very careful because I'm not overly familiar with this particular area in Ohio, but I do know that Ohio is at the forefront in rehabilitation practices. It started off about the year 2000 with the Ohio Plan, and out of that came all these reentry programs that we're part of. So I would say that that I don't know what they're paid, and I'm sure it's not a working or living wage. And the idea is that, number one, it would never pass the Republican candidates for office. Because there's still that lock 'em up mentality. It's universal in the country, and we don't want to be seen as coddling. But I do believe that you can use that to incentivize. And if you look on it and as this will actually benefit people and they'll do a better job, they're not. If you force them to do something for 25 cents an hour. And the thinking might be that we're giving you free housing, but that's a hard argument to sell. I would say that I have not heard much about that, nor have I heard any complaints from our guys about that.
Interesting. Wow. What do you think Ohio's doing differently, and do you think it could be helpful on a national scale?
Ohio started with a study done by the University of Cincinnati, and out of that came the Ohio Plan and the idea of community investment. They have what they initially called the Citizen Circle, and that was what my research was on, which is a community mentoring group. And once you're released, the group would meet together with you like AA, and there would be a support circle. The downside was we didn't meet frequently enough. And like AA, you have to meet not just weekly, but you have to have sponsors for unannounced calls. And because you're dealing with a different clientele, we have to protect the community from being taken advantage of. So there's a lot of issues involved. But out of that grew our type of mentoring, which is more controlled because it's in our housing. But the key, I believe, is the community. Absolutely the community.
This is a left turn, but in that commercial that Marc played, Kate is like the divine hope for your main character. And I'm wondering if your wife has she been your Kate?
No question. Not even a question, because I married late. I was, I think, give or take 29. And I was living in my truck. I was homeless when I met her. And she was working, had a house. In fact, she was working 2 jobs, which made her very attractive.
To a homeless guy.
She's not here, I can say that. But no, what it was is that she represented the stability that I didn't have. But I will say this, that everybody in her circle told her not to date me. They said, you don't realize how loose he is. And they were right. Her pastor wouldn't even marry us. So I had to blackmail a college friend who was a minister. And I threatened to tell his wife what I knew about him. So he married us privately.
So you have an element then of living on the streets and being on the wrong side of the tracks, as it were, correct?
Yes, but not to the degree in the story. I was not abused as a child, but I was ignored, which I think is very common.
Right. I agree. So I imagine there's an element of resonance of experience when you interact with these people that are released from prison and attempting to re-enter the world.
Invariably, what they will say is that I never knew my father, or my mother was addicted, or at best, my mother was always working. And truth is, I rarely hear that one. My grandmother raised me. That's a common thread. And there are occasions when I hear I was in foster care all my life. So they are what I call an extreme version of my story. And so I tried to incorporate that into Daniel Robinson. And Kate had her own demons in the book. She came from a situation where the nuns were God, and that was a very abusive God in her world, where she was always taught that because she wasn't Catholic enough, that she was somehow going to hell. So when Daniel and Kate came together, they were 2 limping people who leaned on one another and learned to walk straight. And I think that's a universal story.
And do you think that's real for you and your wife? Were you?
Not even a question. Absolutely. Because even after we got married, I was struggled with job after job after job. And she never wavered in her commitment. So the truth is, she saved me with her commitment. And I'll put that on the record, because she really did.
And so, like your main character in your book, is she the proof of God is real in your life?
Yeah, and I will be candid. I have a lot of doubts and questions that I bring into my faith, because I think that's an honest way to approach faith. So it's not so simplistic where God speaks and there's an answer written in front of you on stone tablets. I would say most of us walk through the desert wilderness, and we're just trusting our instincts, knowing that the alternative of not believing is far worse. So yes, she is my response to my my lonely prayers. And although she tends to remind me of that periodically, so I paid for that prayer. She's Irish Catholic, so you fill in the blanks.
So without going into too much detail numerically, would you say that you're a financial success now as a result of these endeavors?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have 10 staff, and Good Samaritan now has a budget of nearly $2 million a year. And that's because I think because we provided a service that's stable, it's dependable, and it's honest. And when we started off in 2001, there were a lot of startups under what they called the faith-based initiative in Washington. And a lot of people, well-meaning people, started off saying, I want to do this. And they were actually looking for the grant money. Mm-hmm. And there were, in Dayton alone, there were 20 other startups like ours. And we're the only one remaining because of, number one, the commitment to honesty, the commitment to integrity, and the commitment to my accountant who audits everything I do. And then we're also accountable to the state for our performance, and we're audited there. And we have a reputation of having, I've been told, the best house in the state, which I take as a personal expression of our commitment. And my staff responds to that.
And are you still located in Ohio?
Yes. It's in the Dayton area. So we have 3 counties, but it's primarily in Dayton itself. And actually, what our houses are in a what used to be in 1945 a nice area, but since the auto industry declined, the area declined. So 1 in 3 houses might be abandoned. So what we do, we come into the house, fix it up, and maintain it by daily activities and daily involvement. So we're not an absentee landlord. And that's, in fact, one time the city called and said, you need to make sure your grass is cut. And I said, ma'am, you've got the wrong address because our grass is cut on a regular basis. And I sent her pictures because that's what they're used to dealing with the landlords, is they have to remind them to do those things.
Got it. So as you look forward in your life, is this something you feel is going to be something you do till the day that you die? Or is there an exit point for you where you, quote, retire?
Well, I guess logistically, I could have retired when I started this. Like my son's a cop. He can retire at 55. At 55, I was just starting. So I realistically don't see me retiring. And in fact, it's gotten even busier than ever. What I see is my role shifting to my operations director does all the day-to-day that I used to do. And now this podcasting that I've stumbled into has been just a whole new world for me because, I've never done this sort of thing before. And what I found is that there, particularly today in this culture of instability and anger and frustration, if I can offer a message of second chances and hope, that I'm getting a universal acceptance out there from people. They're hungry for good news. So I may see this as my next step, and this idea of sharing the good news of second chances, not for ex-offenders, but for anybody.
Does your son, who's an officer, interact with your residents? And I'm wondering, because an officer of the law is the enemy. And, from my layman's knowledge, and I'm wondering if there's some real world community coming together from opposing sides.
At one point, my son, he's a sergeant, and he said, I lock them up and you bring them home, Dad. And it did. At one point, he did ask if he could do a little side work with me. And he didn't pursue it because I knew you're trained to look for the problems. You're trained to catch. And I train my staff to not ignore the problems, but to look past them. And I don't think he could ever do that. And even the parole officers, their whole goal is to make sure you abide by your requirements, your laws, your rules. And what I tell my staff is, I don't want to let something go, but I want you to be aware of it. And can we find a way to work through that? Sometimes it's just saying, I know what you're up to. I know you're on the edge, and I don't want to see you lose your bed over that. Just that statement says volumes. So no, my son would not do well here.
Okay. And you mentioned that the upheaval of their early life is still has some resonating in your family structure.
It's actually a positive. We moved so much that my son did not do well with the moves. And I don't blame him. If you move in junior high, then high school, and then again. So he moved into the same job. He's been there for 25 years. He moved into the same house, and his kids were raised in the same house, and he will die in the same house. So he has become structurally far more stable than I was. My daughter is an executive for Enterprise. She's been there for 20 years since college, and she's doing far better than I ever imagined I would do in business. So, and she's got the same house. She's been there, and she's done so well. She's almost paid it off, and she's 45 years old. So they have become what I ideally would like to have become, but I couldn't because my background was so far removed that to get to that point where they could be stable, I had to make that journey. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And so are you a family of four that still come together and celebrate life's landmarks together?
Yeah, we my wife and my daughter talk daily. I have no idea what they talk about. I don't know how women do it, but when men get on the phone, we say yep, and that's it. But women talk, ad infinitum about nothing, and they're happy with it. So every day they talk about things, and now the grandkids are calling every day. So we have four, and we're actively and closely involved in them. And one thing that we've tried to teach them, my wife in particular, is she got her college degree very late in life. She was, I think, probably pushing 60 when she got her bachelor's. Wow. And so she's always telling the kids, I want you to go to college. Don't do what grandma did. Go to college. Mm-hmm. And she's even saving and helping them go to college. So family, because of where we've come from, family is very, very important.
This brings up the issue that one of the things that we're challenged by in the society is the family of humanity. Like all of these people that you're serving in the process that you described, they've all been raised by their grandmothers or absentee fathers or moms who work. And if we were less of a culture of combativeness, criticism, judgment, and one-upmanship, and we were more of a family of cooperative support, guidance, and grace for each other, we'd have less of these issues and these things come up. Do you agree?
And not even a question. In fact, what comes to mind is a book that was written some time ago called Bowling Alone. And it was about the demise of social organizations, demise of the fraternities, of going to the VFW, the American Legion, going to church as it's at an all-time low. And when we talk about the community being involved, if when you and I were growing up, if you did something in the yard, your neighbors told your parents what you were doing. And now we just don't see that as much. So I would say that we're absolutely dealing with structural, what I call misdirections. And the telephone probably makes it much worse because I can be totally involved in something that's 1,000 miles away and ignore my own family, my own circle. I can ignore everybody. And the stuff that I see on social media at best just creates more anxiety.
There's a reason it has bars and we call it a cell phone.
I never thought of that, but that's very good.
That was good.
Yeah, it's a self-imposed prison. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love to watch some of these reels of young Sheldon because the writing on the early shows was so good. But I find myself getting hooked, and it's if you're not careful, it's no different than a drug.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you find people take to the accomplishments of work? Like after a while, they move out of these addictive behaviors into these behaviors where they become addicted to the rewards of good work. Do you find that in your work?
Not with our work so much. In fact, I deal with people who may have never had a job, and so we shoot very low. That the idea is getting a job at McDonald's is and you're only making say $12 an hour, and you're only working 20 hours a week. But the fact is, you're working there, and so it's not so much. I've rarely seen a case where somebody is overworking and addicted to their work. It's usually trying to teach them to show up for work on time. That's our major issue. Now, for people like you and I, in the non-incarcerated culture, I think that's a very big issue for us.
It's one of the ways men end up not being part of their families is because they become so engrossed in the focus of provision and the work that they do.
I would go beyond men on that because I believe our culture, the economy is built on working men and women. Because when I was growing up, you could see people driving older cars. They had one car per family, and it was not uncommon to see an older car in the driveway or a car that was broken down by the side of the road because your tires were bald. But now I've noticed again and again that there's so many new cars on the road. People that I know are not making a lot of money are driving very expensive cars because it's built on a borrowed income. So if you have a working father and mother, then you have to have something to do with daycare, or you have to have food brought in. You have to have a whole different structure. Then your whole lifestyle is geared around this schedule. I know my daughter, for example, the biggest problem they have is transporting the kids to school after sports because of their work. It's a pressure that you and I didn't have growing up. But that's the price we pay, I believe, for having the economy we have. And
I got to walk to Little League.
It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah. As we start to think about wrapping this up, what do you think is the most important message of the Good Samaritan Home and the Running as Fast as I Can books? What is the core message you want people to get from your life and your activity?
One of the phrases I use in the book again and again is that Daniel is told by his mentor, because Daniel was dealing with his ghosts, and he said he just couldn't get past the abuse he'd had. And his mentor kept saying to him, life is written in pencil. You get a lot of second chances. And I think so many of us see our mistakes in ink, and they glare at us. They're always in our face, and we can never get rid of our mistakes, and they haunt us. And what I would say to people is, no matter what you've done, no matter how bad it is, no matter what's been done to you, you can erase it. It just takes a lifetime, perhaps. The key is that life is not a sprint. It's not about running fast and reaching your goal and being happy ever after. Life is a marathon. You will fall down. You will run slow. You will run out of breath. But just keep running, and you will reach your goal. I'm 76, and I'm just now hitting stride. And it's taken me, I started the book 50 years ago in a truck with a Royal typewriter. And now, yeah, it's a true story. And the book is actually being read by people, and maybe they won't have to live in a truck either.
Well, we will definitely include links to the book and any other links that you want to provide us. We've got some already. It's been really interesting talking with you, and I'm inspired to try to make more impact in my own community. And we have some folks that we support as well. The Compton Cowboys and the one I always forget. What is it, Greg? Blast.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, we have a question we ask all of our guests, and it's really important to us. It reflects the through line of all of our questions. And
I'll buckle my seatbelt here.
Yeah.
So here we go. Eminem or Foo Fighters?
I like Merle Haggard. I'm sorry.
You sound kind of like Merle.
That I take that as a compliment.
He's a sage in his own right, that gentleman, for sure. Or
Well, Merle was actually had the same thing. He told Johnny Cash, "What if they find out I've been to prison?" And Johnny said, "Don't live with that. Just move past it. They will forgive you if they know you're honest." And
self-forgiveness is a theme here, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because Daniel's journey was always for love and forgiveness. And some of us are born into a family or our circumstances that we can't control. We had no choice, but we have a choice what we do with it. And that's what I tell people again and again.
We don't burn our draft cards down on Main Street.
John, thank you very, very much for being with us, and wish you, your family, and all the people who come through your home the very, very best. Many blessings.
I want to tell you guys that this was far more civilized than I anticipated.
We must be falling down on the job, Greg.
Yeah.
I was all prepared to get my Valium after this was done, but
yeah. Well, welcome to the world of podcasting, John. Keep up the good work, and let us know if you write another book or if you just want to visit again.
I've started one, but it's called Requiem. It's a build on that. But the trouble is, I've been so busy with this element that even in my schizophrenia, I can't handle too many things at once.
Got it.
Gentlemen, I appreciate it. I really do.
We appreciate your time and energy. Thank you for what you're contributing to our culture and our society and the world at large, John. Lots of love. Thanks again.
My pleasure. And give my regards to California. I've got family out there.
Recording stopped.